All right. Welcome to Shift, everybody. This is the podcast where we talk about radical accountability, true vulnerability, and what it means to kind of show up in this new era. And in a lot of ways, we talk about masculinity. It's not meant to be a men's only podcast. It's really meant to be a conversation about how we show up. With me today is my friend Drew Grimm, who really kind of exemplifies what it means to be accountable and vulnerable and lives off the land in a way that so many of us don't. And you and your wife run a little organization called, you got a website called the Schoolhouse Life,
Yeah.
and you guys been married, what, 20 years now? Coming up on 20, I
Oh,
think.
coming up on 19. So
Coming
yeah,
up on 19.
19 in August.
Nice. And tell me, remind me how many kids you got. You guys?
I've got four.
Four.
So from the ages of 5 to 16.
Nice. Awesome. And you guys have built this life that we were talking about before I hit record, that I'm fascinated by, because you educate and you inspire and you model a lifestyle of homesteading and homeschooling and introduce people to food security, which honestly, given the situation that our country is in and much of the world is in, a lot of people haven't thought about food security or what that looks like.
Yeah, I think more people are thinking about it now. There's kind of a there was kind of a oh crap moment, back when the pandemic hit of where's food coming from?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and how, what is that process? I even remember one of my daughters asking me, she was like, "Where does food come from?
Yeah.
How does
Wow.
that work?" Because she overheard my wife and I, talking about what could happen or what might happen and how we could
Right.
adjust our lifestyles. Because we're fairly privileged. We have a good lifestyle, and we're able to purchase the things that we need, and we're able to have the means to get everything delivered if we wanted to and pay a little extra. And not everybody has that
Right.
capability, right? And so she kind of overheard us talking about changes we might need to make. And my younger kids don't remember us being poor. My
Right.
older kids, they know they remember my mom and dad were like, "Listen, y'all are getting 2 tacos from Taco Bell and that's it."
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
my younger kids don't remember that. So yeah, I'm curious. I'd love to just kind of start with your story, how you met your wife, how long you guys been doing what you're doing, what you guys are into, and
Yeah.
kind of just take it from there.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess it kind of backs up all the way to the days of college. Back in the early 2000s, um, we met at college, and we went to a college. It was like a hippie kind of school up in the mountains of North Carolina, and even there, we started like growing plants on our apartment porch and that kind of thing. Um, I've just always been fascinated with food, where food comes from. I've been having this conversation a lot recently, like what got us started. And I think it was realizing what was in food that shouldn't be in food. And
Mm.
then also like the ethics behind food. So, we have like the way we treat the land, but we also have the way we treat the workers of the farms, like these
Yeah.
massive farms, so there's like all these levels of responsibility that we can take. And I don't know that we need to take it all on at once, but I think we need to show some responsibility in at least a few of those kind of different avenues. So that was kind of our mindset behind it. And we just kind of started, what we could grow when we lived in this like little 1 bedroom apartment. We had like steps that came out, and we just put pots up and down the steps. So there was like enough
I
room
love
to
it.
walk, and everything else was like growing food on the steps.
Yeah.
Um, and then we moved, the area we lived in, it was in Asheville, North Carolina, and we couldn't afford land at all there. So we moved across the state to where land was a little more affordable, and bought like a little city lot. It was like a little bit smaller than a quarter of an acre,
Okay.
and we just turned the backyard into like a garden. We had chickens, we had bees, and we started selling at the farmers market, and really just kind of producing what we could for our family. I remember we, bringing in like 10, 15 gallons of tomatoes into the house, you know, from a harvest, and like putting that up in cans, and then, you know, deciding what we were going to sell at the farmer's market. And we knew we wanted more land, but, you know, like you were kind of saying, we were poor, and it was not like my parents didn't have land, Lacey's parents didn't have land. So we were like first generation wannabe farmers, you know? So
Yeah.
it's kind of, we kind of made this mind shift of, we may never get land, so let's go ahead and do what we can on the little bit of land that we do have. And it was like, as soon as we did that, we started planting like fruit trees in the front yard, and really started developing like the whole property into like a little mini urban farm. And it's kind of funny because as soon as we did that, I feel like then we found this property that we live on now. And it was like, all right, you just got all this established, your mindset's good, now you're gonna move somewhere else, you know? And
That's interesting.
yeah,
Yeah, I feel like in a lot of ways we don't get what we want until we become the people who can handle, right?
yeah,
Like in a lot of ways, whether it's financial or family or, you know, your spirituality. Like a lot of times I find that we want something that's way out here, but like you have to kind of become the person that can
yeah,
handle it, because you might get it, you know, if you had the money, if you had the ability, you might have got it, but it's a lot easier to lose or not take care of properly.
right,
I don't know. It's kind of a weird thing. I'm curious. You mentioned something about like, it says the early 2000s, and you know, it's funny. We're recording this, and I'm not sure when it'll air, or when it'll get put up, but Earth Day is like a couple days from now,
yeah, yeah,
and my kid asked me this morning, like, what's Earth Day? And I was like, man, I don't know how to answer that, because like I remember being 17, 18 years old. You know, I mean, I graduated high school in 1992. So like
okay,
that's almost 30 years ago, when I feel like Earth Day was fairly new,
yeah,
and it being like a big deal to us then. And now like I don't even think of it as a thing. Like,
right, yeah,
which
that is true.
isn't like good or bad. Like we live a fairly sustainably mindset life, and we've dropped the ball in a ton of ways compared to, you know, someone like yourself. But I had a hard time answering her question, because I was like, well, here's kind of what it's supposed to be, and here's kind of what it's really really become, and I don't really know. And like I just feel like when I was 16, 17 years old, there was all these like hopes and dreams, and we were told like if we didn't get our act together, the world was going to end, and like 2020 was going to be the it. Like, and here
Yeah,
we are 2021, and they're
yeah,
telling us 2035 is going to be it. And it's
right,
like it's crazy to me how the mindset has sort of shifted around that.
yeah,
And I'm curious, cuz like when you started caring or becoming aware, I don't want to say you didn't care before, but like when you started to really
right,
become aware and take action
yeah.
towards like food and what's in it and what's not, like how did we I don't know, I don't even know if I have a question here. I'm just, how do we end up in a place where like we've been having this conversation for 35 years that I'm aware
Right,
of,
right.
and it doesn't seem like it's going anywhere.
No, it does. I mean, it seems like it's going somewhere. Unfortunately, not the right direction. You know.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, so do you like bang your head against the wall sometimes at like how like
yeah, and honestly, like, so I see like the pandemic and like everything as a result of our lack of understanding of food, which ultimately takes a step back farther to a lack of our understanding of life and death, and a lack of respect for those two things. I tell people, like, I run up against a lot of vegans, as you can imagine, you
sure.
know, and I tell a vegan that I think that we're very similar. And I know some, if you've got vegans listening, they're probably like, you're absolutely crazy. But um, I I don't think you should be eating meat. I don't think you should be consuming or participating in animal byproducts at all if you are not taking the responsibility for the death of that animal, you know, and a step farther, the life of that animal. Um, you know, if you don't know what it's like to watch an animal be born and then
Hmm.
to have to slaughter that animal for your family and then use every aspect of that animal that you can. I think we get to a place where we are now, where we don't know what real soil is. We don't know how animals are even being treated. Like, I run into a lot of people that don't know what it looks like for the food that, like, where their, like, McDonald's burger is coming from. Like, what does it look like where those animals are being right now? And
Yeah,
it's not a good spot. But yet people are going through that drive-through lane nonstop every day.
it's
And
crazy.
so
I
I don't.
have you read a book called The Vegetarian Myth?
I haven't.
It's it's interesting. I'm certainly no expert on this. That's why I wanted to talk to you, because I love learning about this kind of stuff. In this book, though, the author sort of presents the idea that, like, and again, like, if you're vegetarian or vegan and you listen to this, I'm not making a judgment one way or the other. It's just, you know, in this particular book, she presents sort of these ideas behind, the idea that, like, eating vegetarian actually can't happen because there's living organisms within the soil. And if you're
For sure.
properly handling your soil and you're raising your crops properly, like, the amount of water and the amount of other live bioorganisms that are within the soil, just like in a cup full of nutrient dense, rich soil, like, there's
Yeah.
living organisms in that. And, like,
Yeah.
and sort of unpacks a little bit some of the ideologies behind, like, how environmentally unsustainable, meat production or animal byproducts is, and kind of says, look, yes, in the form of agriculture, like the big agri, that's not sustainable. But when you're doing, sustainable urban farming, or your I can't remember what it's called, but, like, when you move your crops from one part of your land to the other, or your
Kind of like
animals,
rotational. Yeah.
yeah, like rotational stuff, like, and there was a farm, we used to get raw milk from a dairy here in town, and they had a couple of cows and chickens and animals, and they did rotational where all their pens were on wheels, and they could wheel the, they could move them so they were on this little section of the plot,
Yeah.
all the time. And it unfortunately didn't really survive because it takes work that
It takes a lot. Yeah.
most people don't recognize. Like, I mean, my son and I sat down and did the math one time on what it would take to, like, feed or raise the number of chickens that, Chick-fil-A serves. And it was
Oh, wow.
like,
Yeah.
there's not enough room on the planet for that many where are all these chickens coming from?
Right. They're stacked up in houses.
Doesn't, right, they're vertical, it doesn't make
Yeah.
sense. And I think so many people don't think about that. And it's because not only is there, like, the physical piece of it, right? Your animals that you raise and then slaughter and then eat, like, there's also, like, emotions behind that, and there's all of those things,
For
right?
sure.
Like, so I'm curious, like, how are you able to do that? Like, how much land do you really need to have to feed a family of four in a reasonable way?
Um, I think that you kind of almost have to back up and ask, like, what do you want to eat first? Like,
Okay.
like, if you want to do a normal American diet, then it's probably more than if you're willing to, like, eat meat maybe once a week, would be
Okay.
my thought on it. Um, we generally try and raise about 100 to 200 chickens a year, and
Okay.
that's close to enough for us to eat throughout the year. On top of that, we generally slaughter about 3 sheep, and that's generally not enough red meat. I will go out, like, during a hunting season and try and get like 1 to 2 deer on top of that. So all of that, like, that's the animals, but then it depends on what your soil's like. Like you were talking about, like, how well is your grass growing and that kind of thing. So there's so many different layers to it, but I don't know. I would say maybe 5 acres. 5 acres,
Yeah.
that's probably a reasonable amount where you could be close to producing your most of your own food.
And have real, like, food security
Yeah,
throughout
yeah. You'd
whatever.
probably be skinnier. You'd be skinnier than I am.
Yeah.
But
That's good. That's another really interesting thing though, right? Like we kind of
yeah,
need to be skinnier.
right, yeah,
Like, I mean, I don't know
yeah,
like if 2,000 calories is the right number.
right,
It's whatever the FDA or
yeah,
the food people say. Um,
yeah,
but it's funny when you said, if we went off of standard American diet, I was like, well, look, nobody's got the means to process cereal and Ritz crackers and Girl Scout
right,
cookies in their backyard, right? So like,
right,
I
yeah,
don't even know what the standard American diet is anymore because
yeah,
so much of it, even within my own, and we have like 8 kids, right? So like, I look
yeah,
at my family and it's like, I think back on some of the choices that we've made. Not that I wouldn't have had this many kids, or not that what but like if we were operating from a place of being accountable for our own existence and
hmm,
our own sustenance, would we have brought that many mouths to feed
right,
into our
yeah,
home, right? Like it's a real
yeah,
consideration. Um, and it kind of speaks to where we're at kind of socially with
yeah.
how much we don't consider the overall impact of the choices we make.
I think like I'd struggle with that because I think ultimately another area that we're lacking in is true community. So, if you had, how many kids you guys have? You got
We
a
have
lot,
eight.
right?
We have
8.
eight.
Yeah. That's not a lot. But yeah.
Sure.
um, but if we're operating in a true community where your 8 kids can go help a neighbor that is producing milk, and another neighbor that is producing chickens, like we've pulled ourselves away where every family is almost an island now, where, I don't think,
Mm,
again, that's where we should be at. My ideal situation is where we could, everything that we consumed was within walking distance. So maybe I produce sheep and wool, and somebody else down the road is producing milk, So in this like kind of utopian society of or community, that's, I see how it maybe wouldn't matter how many people you produced or how many people
yeah.
you had in your family if everybody's working together and kind of pulling away from this money mindset and maybe more of like a barter mindset,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know?
We've had people, some politely and directly, and some not so politely and or indirectly, share with us that we've been irresponsible in having the number of children that we have because the carbon footprint of each human is X, and like this and that. And it's been interesting because I love that perspective on it, because for us it's always been like, each one of my kids has taught me so much,
For sure. Yeah.
like there's no way I could imagine not having, and I would have more, honestly. We've had some situations in our life that have prevented that, and
Yeah.
that's okay too. Um, so yeah, it's interesting because I always tell people like, well, my sister doesn't have any kids, so if we're going by like 2.3 average, I've got at least 3 friends that don't have any children, so I
Right.
just had theirs. Like we're good.
Yeah.
But I
I
love
look
that.
at it as to like I'm my goal is to produce. I've got 4 really amazing humans I'm going to put out into the world. That
Yeah,
like we're homeschooling, we're changing mindsets. Like my goal is for them to go out and not become another piece in the current situation, but to go out and disrupt it all.
yep,
And I'm putting 4 of those out there. And I know you guys are the same way. Like
a
you're
hundred
putting
percent.
8 of those out there, like
Yeah.
we're putting world changers out there, not factory workers,
Yeah,
So
we I often get asked, like when I talk about what the problems are in the world or what I see as challenges and things like that. People often ask, like, well, what are you going to do about it? And my answer is, I'm going to raise my kids in a way that the things that we believe can help create positive change, they're going to carry that forward. And
yeah,
like the best thing that I can do for my community is to put more positive, light bearing, you
yeah,
know,
exactly.
human honoring humans back out into society. And so, yeah, 100%. I think that's a huge responsibility. And I'd like to raise them in a way that they're more accountable and aware of the impacts they have. Like, I love what you said about, people like now living on an island, because I try to explain to my kids all the time, like, none of us live in a vacuum. Like,
Right. Yeah.
I got a kid, it's what, 20 degrees outside right now, and she wants to go to the store and walk up to the store. She's wearing shorts and a t-shirt. And I'm like, hey, it's cold out. She's like, well, I'm not cold and I'll suffer the consequences. And I said, okay, that's great. But like, you won't, because you can't drive yourself somewhere if you get sick, and you can't do
Yeah.
the, you're not old enough yet to suffer those consequences. And none of us lives on an island. None of us live in a vacuum.
Right.
Like, all the choices I make impact all those kids that live in my house. And the same, I know the same goes for you.
Yeah.
I think part of the thing that where we've landed is like, I don't think people want that responsibility. Like, we
Right.
kind of, somewhere along the way, and I'm curious your thoughts on this, but somewhere along the way we got told that, like, the guy with the certificate on the wall, who's the expert in whatever field it is, whether it's money or medicine or building widgets,
Yeah.
knows more about that than I do.
Right.
And like, our confidence and our self-worth sort of started getting stripped away, where like, so many of us, because like, listening to you talk, I'm like, I have no idea how to go do that kind of stuff. And
Yeah.
I think I'm capable, but I don't know. And
Yeah.
like, I'm recognizing my own like programming coming up of like,
Well, it's like I know you're into like the essential oils natural health world, and it's the same kind of thing, like it's this like all of a sudden you're kind of like, wait, like you said, somebody's been telling me this is how I need to believe, but what if I don't?
yeah,
Like yeah.
yeah, it takes a lot of bravery to do, and courage, I think. Like, so like, how often do you guys run up against people who are like, wow, you guys are crazy, versus like,
Not too often here recently. And I mean, to like full transparency, we still go to the grocery store and stuff. I
sure,
mean, it's like I would love to be 100% producing our own food, but we don't yet. Um, but in the last like year or two, it's been more people coming to us like, how can I do what you guys do, or how can I get started? Generally, for the most part, it's been people like, how do I get started, or
yeah,
what's a change I can make,
yeah.
that kind of
So
thing.
what is that? What does that look like for them? How does, like, because you mentioned living in an apartment, right, and little pots
Yeah,
and stuff like that. So we're in a place where like, we still rent a house,
yeah,
and there's rules around that. Like, I went to our property management and I said, hey, I want to get some chickens. This particular place that we live now has a great spot that would be perfect, out of the way, kids can still play. And they were like, yeah, we're not really down for that. And
yeah,
so it's like, okay, there's boundaries that I don't
yeah,
really love that
right,
exist. So like, what would be the like small ways people
yeah.
that maybe don't have 5 acres
Hmm.
could make some of those changes?
So I think the first one is like, what can you do on your property? Like maybe you can't raise chickens, but can you grow even just a few veggies? Just so like you have some kind of connection with the ground that you're living on. And then the second would be like, who around you is doing that? Like instead of going to the grocery store, is there a farmer of like chickens that's raising eggs or meat in a way that is sustainable and good for the land? And can you buy from them instead? Then it's like not convenient. It's not easy. Like we go the person that a good friend of mine raises a dairy cow, so we drive 10 minutes to get milk from him, and then um, during the winter when we didn't have eggs, we were driving 10 minutes in a completely different direction to get eggs. Like it's not convenient, but I feel like that's where they got us. Is like
Yeah,
convenience. Like we've got to sacrifice that a little bit if we want things to change.
yeah, yeah. I agree. I think the convenience, and I only see it getting amplified with things like social media, and
Yeah.
how quickly we can move money or purchase things, or Amazon shipping
Right.
is like,
Yeah.
I mean, my son ordered something from Amazon on Sunday and it was here by dinner on Monday. And it's like, bro, like, that's
Yeah. It's too
like,
fast.
don't
Yeah.
get used to that. Like, I
Yeah.
feel like, the whole idea of like slow living is something that I think it's having a resurgence because, people for the last 20, 30 years have been running the rat race and doing all the things. And then they're watching their parents, you know, die or at the end of their life going, what was it all for? It didn't make
Right.
I didn't get any fulfillment out of it. Like there's money in the bank and, I have, awards or plaques or, achievements, but like I don't have any fulfillment. And
Yeah.
so I feel like that's kind of shifting back. And I know
Yeah.
for me, that was a big change for us when we decided to get into the essential oils and create a business model that allowed us time freedom.
Yeah.
Because I think the other thing is like a lot of people, I mean, they're working 40, 50, 60 hours a week just to keep their heads above water.
Right.
And like convenience for them isn't a luxury. It's almost a necessity, right? It's like, it's not
Yeah.
convenient, it's efficient. And I just need it to be
Yeah.
efficient.
And I don't know, like, I mean, I look at, I broke this system down to somebody else the other day of like, and I might get some flack for this, but I'll say it anyhow.
Yeah, no, we're
People are born, they get vaccinated. The vaccines cause illnesses. The illnesses require medical attention. Because of that medical bill, you have to work a job, and sometimes the medical bill causes you to work a second job. So you don't have time to stop to get real food. So you go through a fast food joint to get food. Well, that fast food joint that you're getting that food from causes more problems. So your medical
yep,
bills go up. So you got to work more. And it's just like then you're sold the bill of like, I need insurance in case I get sicker. And like
yeah,
you're working for that. Like it's this constant like I feel like, and then I was talking to somebody the other day that, then you hit retirement or elderly age, and the retirement home says, we've got to take all the money that you just worked for and saved up to pay for you to live the last few years of
yeah,
your life and die, and it's like, this is the system that we're buying into. And like, I guess part of what we're trying to do here is say, like, maybe step out of this. Like, how can we just like take a sidestep? And
yeah,
and I honestly I don't have all the answers, especially if you're somebody that's working 40 or 50 hours a week. I don't know. Like to me, I think the first step is like looking at your food and maybe saying like figuring out a way to not eat all of that processed food
yeah,
that's causing all kinds of inflammation and stuff like that, and do something different. But it's hard.
yeah. The epiphany for me was the insurance game.
Yeah. Yeah.
I had a job and they offered insurance and I didn't take it because I sat down and for whatever reason, because I'm not a risk taker and I'm not uh I'm pretty anti-establishment,
Yeah.
and at the same time I don't like to be the outcast, center of attention, because a lot of times when you're that person who's outside the box far enough, you got all eyes on you trying to figure out. So for me, I was never really willing to do that. Like a lot of the big risks that we've taken in our life has been my wife, making those suggestions. We did home births because that was her idea. We homeschooled because that was her idea. And
Yeah.
I'm the more vocal, so I'm the advocate for it. People are like, oh, that was so brave of you, and I'm like, yeah, no, that was all her.
Yeah.
I came
Yeah.
along for the ride, but I'm the
That's
top.
we're very much similar in that way.
Yeah, like that's
Yeah.
all Carrie's doing. And what I found though is that I was at this crossroads and I sat down and I did the math on what the insurance was going to cost me.
Right.
And I was like, well, my kids don't get well. Like I don't do all those like necessary medical interventions.
Yeah.
And so I don't need the copay. I don't need the thing. And I did the math and it was going to be like $8,000 a year for us to pay for insurance. And I was like, my kids haven't been to the doctor in 5 years.
Yeah.
That's 40 grand that I would
Right.
save. And so I just bailed on it and was like, I'm just going to roll the dice. And, I've had two major medical instances with my children that's cost me about $35,000 in 15 years.
Yeah.
And I just paid cash for it. And what's amazing is I remember one time my son fractured his elbow and I went in for x-rays and it was like, well, we're not insured. And they were like, okay, cool. It'll be like $350 for the x-rays. And I
Yeah.
said, just out of curiosity, if I was insured, she's like, well, then we got to send it to this guy. And like tax on his 10%, and then I send it to this guy and he tax, and then it comes back, and then it's gonna be like $750.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, that's dumb. So I just paid the 3 people, walked out the door. We were done.
Right.
It was like, it doesn't make any sense for us to carry that. And I started seeing people, like you said, who are like, I hate my job. I want to go to another job. I have this opportunity, but if I leave, I'm diabetic. I
Yeah.
can't, with a pre-existing condition, get insured. So now I'm stuck working this job I hate
Yeah.
because I need the medical coverage, right?
Yeah.
And nobody's teaching that guy that, like, hey, we could probably reverse your diabetes through food, exercise, you
Yeah.
know. And you know, I know that sounds crazy, but I know people who've done it. I know
No.
people who,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
not unheard of. It's just not advertised because it
Right.
takes you outside the network. And we
Right.
can't have that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy, man. Talk to me about homeschooling. So you guys homeschool. What does that
Yeah.
look like for you? Do you guys follow a curriculum? Do you guys, like, what's a day in the life of a
Yeah.
homeschool Graham look like?
So Lacey heads up the homeschooling for the most part. I'm kind of the more of the hands-on part of the
Yep.
homeschooling. Um, in that, like, so once like spring, once warm weather hits, which is hit for us now, homeschool almost goes completely out the window. Um, if it's a rainy day, they stay inside and they work on their curriculum. And the curriculum is kind of like a self-guided kind of
Mm-hmm.
slightly unschool. There's like key things that they kind of hit, but most of the time it's life schooling for us, like homestead homeschooling, I guess. Like,
Yeah.
our two middle two like they take care of the chickens, so they're like selling eggs off the front porch, and like um when you break it down, it's like marketing. Like I helped them like make up the sign, and Lacey helped them make up a label, and they've got to take care of the animals. They've got to figure out like how many eggs can they sell and for how much. And then I like hit them with like I was like, well, I need 20% to pay for feed, and then you need to give 10% to charity. And my
Yep.
woman, she's like, that's a lot. I was like, imagine if you're getting the 30% for taxes on top of that,
Right.
like, but so we have like those kind of conversations. And that's like, to me, again, like raising amazing human beings, like that's the kind of thing that they need to know in
Yeah.
our book. So that's kind of like right now, that's an average day, is like just being outside. Like we're planting the heck out of stuff right now. We've got a greenhouse going, and um, just all kinds of plants, animals, talking about soil health and grass, and what all that takes to grow and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I dig it. We're unschoolers
Okay.
here. I mean, we don't have a curriculum. We haven't had one for years. It was a really hard transition for me to get into
Yeah.
because, like, if you look at it from like the Gallup strengths standpoint, like learner is my anchor strength, and everything
Okay.
for me is about like structure and like I'm really big on discipline and very concerned about like what do they know and how do we know what they know and what do we do. And so like the transition into homeschooling was really tricky for us as a couple. Carrie was like all in and very trusting and just knew that she had, a good path. But for me, it was a lot more like, I'm not so sure this. And then, I don't know, probably 5-6 years into it, I'm like, these kids are so smart and they know so much. And it's the same exact thing. It's like, I got 3 Girl Scouts. And so like Girl Scout cookie season is like, we're
Yeah.
just super heavy on math and numbers and percentages and, multiplication and division. And what does this all look like? And taking inventory and, every chance that we're baking something or cooking in the kitchen, it's, all those fractions.
Yeah.
Like my one kid was like, I have no idea what a fraction is. And I was like, do you remember fixing such and such with 1/3 cup? She was like, oh, okay. Like, because
Yeah.
it just isn't in that box that their
Yeah.
other kids that they interact with are used to. Um, do you guys, like, how do you respond to people who say, well, homeschool kids are weird, they're not really social?
Yeah. I mean, the social aspect, like we have a few different co-ops that we go to, and they get plenty of socialization. And I definitely think homeschool kids are weird. Like when their friends come over, they're their friends are super entertaining to me. Like for one, they know how to talk to adults,
Uh-huh.
and two, they always have like some weird thing that they're obsessed with. But it's like we talked about, like that's what I want. I don't want someone that's been trained to like sit at a desk for 8 hours a day and all of the things that come with that. Like I want people that are like weird. And you look at the
Yeah.
people that are navigating the world now, like for good or bad, they're generally kind of strange people. And I
Yeah.
mean, I think that's good. It sometimes is a. I don't think of my kids as that weird, but I'm around them all the time. But like
Sure.
again, it's I find it entertaining where they obsess and what they look at and that kind of thing.
I love it. What are your kids into?
Um, a lot of them are like. It's funny because I was just thinking about like milestones. None of them read at an early age. Like I'd say 7. Do you know who Rudolf Steiner is?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So he says that when they lose their lower teeth, that's when they're ready to read.
Okay.
Which has been like this cool thing where I noticed like when they start losing our third, our third oldest, she just lost her bottom teeth and she's kind of really starting to get into reading now. So they're all into the reading. They're all our 3 oldest take ballet, so
Okay.
they're super into ballet, music. They 2 of them play piano, one of them plays violin. So those kind of things, like I mean, the piano is constantly going in our house, which is kind of like I grew up in a non-musical house. Like nobody played instruments. We didn't really listen to music. So it's kind of like this cool thing of like, they'll like work on songs together and
That's
like
awesome.
bust out the violin and the piano and do things. I mean, as you know, it's not always like that. There's a lot of fighting and
Yeah.
but
Yeah, there's a lot of other stuff going. What's your mix? You got boys and
um
girls, all girls?
the 3 oldest are girls and then the 5-year-old's a boy. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome.
So
Nice.
he's super into like outside making bow and arrow and all the like I feel like it's stereotypical boy stuff. Like I've been very careful to like try and navigate. Like I didn't want to influence him one way or the other, but the dude is just like naturally into like what people would call boy stuff,
Yeah.
and it's been really interesting. He wants to like go hunting and do those things where the girls they were kind of interested into that, but um,
Yeah.
yeah, not
There's a
not yeah.
there's a great book called Why Beautiful People Have More Daughters.
Oh yeah,
And it's fascinating. It breaks down the like socio anthropological, and I'm not even sure if I'm saying that right. Um, sort of ways in which humans have fallen into certain roles, and why men like large-breasted women, and why women like tall, dark, and skinned men, and why
yeah,
why children will actually be drawn towards boy things or girl things. And it's really fascinating because it talks about how evolution works in the animal kingdom, right? And like it
right,
takes a long time with a little bit of stimulus over time for like the salamander to get on land, or for this
yeah,
animal to develop a different color plume because of its surroundings, right? And it talks about how after the industrial revolution and even before, the rate of stimulus change is like 10x what our brains can actually handle.
oh wow,
And
yeah,
so like men like large-breasted women because we're still Neanderthals, and we think that that's means they can feed children,
right, yeah,
when like most people are formula, McDonald's, like
right,
whatever, right?
yeah,
like
yeah,
like the rate of breastfeeding, I mean, breastfeeding is actually starting to be like advertised against, which is like a whole other conversation. It's one of the dumbest things I've ever heard.
yeah,
And it's fascinating though, because it breaks down like, and it says in the beginning, like first you have to kind of believe that like evolutionary things happen within the animal kingdom or we can't have the conversation,
right,
and like some of those things. So one of the things that it talks about that you made me think of was, they did this huge study with children, at like 6 weeks or 10 weeks, like some ridiculously early age where they couldn't have had any gender bias influence at all. And the number of anatomically boy children that went towards like trucks and blues and balls and like boy things, and the same for females, was almost like 95%. Like
Wow. Yeah.
boys are boys, girls are girls, and that doesn't mean that like outside influences and there aren't exceptions and stuff like that. But it was
Right.
really fascinating because it's like it's the brain. It's like,
Yeah.
how much of it is nature and how much of it is nurture,
Yeah.
right?
I was a big believer until then that most of it was nurture. Until like, I mean, dude was like, he was probably like, this is our third kid, right? And our fourth kid. And he's like walking, he's like barely walking, and he picks up a stick and he makes it into a gun. And and I'm like, none of the other three had done anything like that. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like I had at that point still been like trying to not influence him, and
Yeah.
like and I was just like, man, this dude is like he just got it like in him somewhere. It's
Yeah.
kind of crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brene Brown did a interview. I think it was with Dax Shepard and Tim Ferriss, if I remember it correctly. And they're talking about addictions and some other things, but she's also talking about like the genetics of human beings. And she referenced this phrase that's really stuck with me. And she said, nature loads the gun and environment pulls the trigger.
Hmm.
And it really stuck because I was like, okay, that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
Right? Like what's implanted on your DNA is there. And so it's kind of not either or, right? It's like a lot of both. And I think it just kind of
Right.
depends on how prevalent is that like nature piece. And
Mhm.
then, the environment can push it one way or the other if it's kind of in the
Yeah.
middle, right? But if you're all boy, you're all boy, man. Like
Yeah.
there's nothing you're gonna
Yeah.
do to shift those gears.
Yeah.
But yeah, I dig it. That's
Yeah.
super cool, man. You said something about, and this is way back. I want to kind of revisit this because I think it's a touchy subject, and I'm curious your thoughts on it. But you mentioned that like we don't honor or recognize like life and death,
Sure.
and
Yeah.
you kind of talked about it in terms of like raising animals in a way, but we also kind of touched on like the life cycle of like when people get old and they reach their end of life, we really don't know what to do or how to handle it.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and I've thought a lot about that lately for a couple of reasons. But I'm curious, like, what that looks like for you, what that, and I feel like it's touchy because sometimes there's a tension between being compassionate and like loving and caring. And then there's like the realities of like, none of us are going to make it out of this thing alive.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Just
That
the
we
truth.
know of.
Yeah.
Right.
So far.
Nobody's come back to tell us differently. Right.
Right.
Yeah. So my mind in the past, like I say, maybe a year or two has really like I've developed this like idea on um like the connection between land and life and death. So on our homestead, we will eat an animal, we'll raise an animal, kill that animal, eat that animal, and then our waste goes into a septic tank, which basically returns the waste to the earth. Up here at our schoolhouse, we have a composting toilet. So this is kind of like it started really making it click to me is the composting toilet, you take that out and you put it in the ground, either in a compost pile or in a hole in the ground. But any food that we produce here, it's a continuous loop. So if you take that and then you go into the city, the food you bring in from the grocery store, you eat it, you consume it, you put it in the toilet and you flush it and it goes away. And a lot of times people are also not, like what grounding is, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
people aren't connected to the ground either. So you have like this life or this death that's completely separate, frequency and grounding and electric currents and all that it's completely separated from everything that you're doing, basically. And I think that life and death, you know, essentially it's a giant energy cycle. Like we consume energy that is produced from the sun, and we become energy, and at the end of our lives we return to the earth, and our bodies become more energy for other, kind of like you were talking about, like plants eventually will eat us, and that'll produce more energy for something else. And um that's the physical side. The spiritual side is completely different, but
Yeah.
like there's like that whole I feel like part of what's missing is that connection. And it, um, I don't know if that means, I don't know if the answer is like go poop in your backyard or not. I don't know if, if that's it, but there is like
Yeah.
this element of like we need to be. What would it look like if in the world if we were all connected to like a full circle going on instead of like everything coming and going and never actually being connected to it? I
Yeah.
don't. Does that answer your question? Some of it, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's your thoughts, so there's no,
Yeah.
there's no wrong answer. I think that it's fascinating. I've got, grandparents that are getting older, and and by older I mean like pushing 90, right? So like
Yeah.
conversations are being had about what do we do and how
Yeah.
do we handle it, and some of those conversations have been like, well, you know, we should have had this conversation 20 years ago
Right.
and plan for those things because we don't, and they're sensitive and they take nuance and finesse, and there's emotions involved, and and then you run into something like a pandemic where there's all these different narratives and all these different you know uh what's the word I'm looking for, things that people want out of it, right? Like there's all these different directives that people are trying to figure out, and part of that includes people dying, and
Right. Yeah.
and in some ways I think that's been used to manipulate,
Yeah.
and because it's like, oh well, they're gonna die, and it's like, well, we all are,
Right.
it's such a weird thing, and so like it's this thing that death has been used as a tool of fear,
Mm-hmm.
and yet I don't know what the percentages are. You might, I'd be curious, but like
Yeah.
what percentage of the population is actually vegetarian, right?
Right.
like
Yeah.
like we're all so consumed with like we can't let anyone die, but you can't eat a billion hamburgers and and not kill
Right.
some things. So
Yeah.
where's the disconnect, and why,
Yeah.
and I was telling my wife the other day, I was like, I feel like the indigenous people had it right. Like there comes a time where you just, here's your tree, have a seat, and we'll see you on the next one.
Right. Yeah.
Like it's really
Yeah.
cold to say out
No.
loud, but there's
Yeah.
some value in it.
I think that like a lot, this is probably going more to the spiritual side, but I think a lot of the pandemic has been this, and it's been over time, but man has decided that like we can control nature, we can control this world. And we've taken ourselves and we've made ourselves gods and have said, we can control life, we can control death, we can control health. And God, creator, whatever you want to look at that, infinite light, step aside, we can do this. And um, I think the reality, I mean, here we are in the pandemic, and the reality is we can't. And
Yeah.
we need to accept that and be okay with life and death. It's part of everything that's been going on since the beginning of time.
Yeah.
So like why now are we saying if we all go sit in a house, no matter what your view is, we all go sit in a house and wear a mask. Now we can control life and death. It it's out of our control. And I think if we can accept that it's out of our control, then we can have a better life, you know?
Yeah. I love that. It aligns really well with the Stoic teachings, which I talk about all the time because I'm a huge fan of the Stoic philosophy.
Yeah.
And and it's funny, people think Stoicism is like unemotional, we don't have feelings, or things like that, or it's like we bury them, and it's like quite the opposite. It's recognizing what we control, what we don't control,
Right.
and
Yeah.
honoring the things that we don't. Like one of the key tenets of Stoicism is like to live within the laws of nature.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting is Marcus Aurelius was one of the most popular Stoic philosophers, and he was the Roman emperor. And during his time as emperor, they had the Antonine Plague, which killed millions and lasted for 14, maybe 15 years. And if you read the book that he's known as writing called Meditations, he doesn't mention the plague in it once.
Oh wow.
He's
Yeah.
only focused on what he can control
Yeah.
and what he can do, and so he never even talks about the plague. And
Wow.
it was like one of the like largest sort of circumstances of his rule, and I think you're spot on, man. I think we've the sort of arrogance and the ego that comes up with like controlling life and death, and then we get into like these even more nuanced conversations about like what is life, like what good is it to live to 100 if the last 10 years of that is of no value, right?
Right.
Like
Yeah.
Dennis Leary, I don't know if you remember Dennis Leary, the comedian. He does a whole piece about like when I get to the end, he's like, I'm gonna smoke, I'm gonna drink, I'm gonna live my life, whatever. He's like, because I don't want those last 10 years in the wheelchair. He's like,
Yeah.
he's
Yeah.
like, the guy keeps telling me every year you quit smoking is another year added on, and he's like, have you seen those last 10? I don't want them. Like I'm good without them.
Yeah.
And I think there's some truth in that. Like,
Yeah.
we don't talk enough about food and like how powerful we are as humans to just manage our own stuff.
Right.
And yeah, but I think it's hard because I think the piece, and you kind of touched on it, like the spiritual part, like that's become such a divisive thing in society right now. Like,
Yeah.
and I feel like so many people don't really have hope or direction there.
Yeah.
And not to get religious or put my views on anyone at all, I just feel like if people had some hope or belief that there was something next,
Right.
they would maybe be a little bit more at peace when this season,
Yeah. Yeah.
this experience ended. But
Right.
like the way we hang on to it, like it's over.
Right.
um and I don't know how we get around that. I don't know how you help people find hope that like this thing's going to come to an end, but there's something else, or there's not. I don't know.
I mean, to me, it's legacy is a lot of it. Like what are you doing with your life now? How are you making it better? And how are you leaving this earth, or the life that you did have? How are you leaving that better? What kind of, and I feel like if I'm being 100% transparent, it's almost a little intimidating, like it to think like, okay, I want to leave a legacy, and not people usually use legacy and like financial legacy, but I guess I mean more of like an impact. Like, how am I leaving an impact, like a positive impact?
Yeah.
And like if I can end my life knowing that I made it better, made my time here was better, I made the earth better, then, you know, I feel like that gives you a lot of hope. I don't know. For me, it does.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think it does. It's interesting. I never really thought about it. And I don't think a legacy in terms of finances. I think you're right. A lot of people do, but I think of it in terms of my kids. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
generational healing is a big topic in our household, and it's a big part of why I do what I do. Like,
Yeah.
I'm a descendant of the Hatfield McCoy. So we have,
Got some
generations
baggage.
of,
Yeah.
we got some baggage, man. We got generations of murder and incest and all sorts. I found out the other day that I've got like and I hope he doesn't mind me sharing this, but here goes. My great grandfather did time during the Great Depression for being a pimp.
Mm.
And like that's baggage. There's stuff like
Yeah.
all the things that roll around into that, right? And
Right.
so I hear that kind of stuff, and it's like, okay, well, how do I shift that for
Yeah.
my kids? How do I heal that generation? So the legacy that I look for is like, what does that look like in raising our kids and making changes? And it's yeah, it's interesting because I think so many people are just lacking hope.
Yeah.
And I don't know about where you live, but here we have like this huge rate of teen suicide.
Yeah.
It's almost in ways unbearable. I feel like we're hearing all the time, and my kids are homeschooled,
Yeah.
but we go to church and we have, different sports that they play and things that they do. So, we're connected to our community. And it's like, I had a pretty dysfunctional upbringing, and I contemplated what that would be like, to take my own life.
Yeah.
But I never, obviously I didn't, but I just never got to a place where I felt like it was even a real thing.
Sure.
And I can't, and I mean, these kids that I see, not to discount their pain in any way, but I'm like, y'all got it pretty decent. Like, what's
Right.
happening that, like, psychologically or mentally they're struggling so much.
Yeah.
Um, and that hope piece, I think, is a big one.
I think so too. Yeah.
I wonder if more families didn't live in a way that was more sustainable, like, even if it's urban farming, because you mentioned urban farming, because, like, not a lot of people can buy 5 acres.
Right.
Um, so I want to kind of talk a little bit about that, because I feel like, would you say that, like, the lifestyle that you guys live and what you're doing for your kids and with your kids, they're more confident and more self-secure than maybe some of the other kids that you see?
I think so. I don't know that they always like it that they are that way. Um,
It's
but
hard.
yeah, in the farm, like from the beginning, I mean, part of the reason we have it is I want them to know what hard work is. Kind of like you were saying, like we're very fortunate in our like financial situation, and you know, I want them to know, aside from life and death, like hard work, and farming is hard work, and there's nothing worse than like watching like a whole flock of chickens having gotten killed by a coyote or something, like there's that whole aspect too. But from the beginning, we developed our homestead with the idea that the kids would be responsible for different parts of it. So like gate latches are down lower, and structures they can handle, and all of that kind of thing,
Interesting.
which gives them like ownership on like I was saying, the two of them have like the layer chickens. They're about 95% responsible for those chickens. Like I'm almost like an overseer of my
Yeah.
little like different subsects on the farm. But that I will push them a lot, and like they'll say, well, I can't get this, and or I can't do this, and that's like for me like a red flag every time when they can't, whenever they use that word. I'm like, well, there's a way, like
Yeah.
go ahead and figure this out. And
Yeah. Our kids are not allowed to use that word. Like, that's
yeah.
not.
Yeah.
I'm like, you can, you just won't. Like, let's
Right.
let's
Yeah.
find us, or you just don't know how yet.
Right.
Let's
Yeah.
find the solution.
Yeah. And a lot of times they'll be like, I think they know like that I will find a way. There's always a way, So it's kind of like helping them find that way. But I think that brings a lot of confidence. Like some of their friends will come over and just kind of be mind boggled at what they do, because
Hmm.
kids their age don't have that kind of responsibility.
Yeah, we don't have a farm, but we get that a lot from people. They're like, your kids are way more mature. Or, like, my 4-year-old will say something and somebody will look over and go, how does she even know what that,
Yeah.
like, and it's like, well, because they're around adults and they're not, we raise our kids in a way that, like, I believe that they are sovereign people and they have free agency. So, if my kid can make a case that he doesn't have to do his chores, he doesn't have to do his chores. It's yet to happen.
Right.
Because they need to participate in the household, and
Yeah.
dad's going to win that argument,
Right.
9 times out of 10. But I remember we were driving home one time. My daughter, when she was still in public school, my oldest child, um, she got good grades, and so she made a bunch of money from grandparents and parents and whatnot when we were still playing that game, and so
Yeah.
she got to go to Build-A-Bear, and she bought a doll, and she was kind of doing something out of line. And I was like, hey, if you don't get your act together, I'm going to take your doll away. And she's like, well, you can't. So what do you mean I can't? She said, well, I bought it with my money. It's mine. And I was like, but you, yeah, okay. You're right. And I was like, no, I'm the dad. And she was like, when you go, she's like, if your boss came over for dinner and saw your house wasn't clean, would he take your paycheck away? Like,
Right.
just full on was able to like
Yeah.
logically express that, like, I earned this, it's mine, you have no agency over it. And I was like, you're 9. This,
Right.
this
Just be quiet.
you're not supposed to. And the running joke in my house is, a couple years ago, my now 10-year-old was pushing and pushing and pushing, and she said, I don't understand why. And I said, because I'm dad and you're 6. And that
Yeah.
was it. Like, I was just tired, I couldn't.
Yeah.
There's sometimes, but I feel like that's the thing, man. Like, our kids, and I think your kids would land in the same boat, that they're not in the system, and so their
Right.
ability to feel ownership over themselves and be able to say no,
Yeah.
that's not, that I don't, I'm okay, I'm okay without that, or I want to do this and you don't have the ability to tell me no, is
Yeah.
so much stronger, that they don't feel hopeless.
Yeah.
And for me, like, that's such a powerful thing to teach your kids, because we're not sending them into an environment where it's like, sit down, shut up, follow the rules, get in line, do this, without any explanation of how that brings value. Like,
Right. Yeah.
and I love the intention of, like, the way that you guys have set up your homestead, when you mentioned, like, the latches are a little bit lower and things are set up so that not only can they participate, but you've made it functional for them.
Yeah.
That's important. Like, that, to me, that would show them that they matter, that it's that their height, right? Like,
Right.
their needs were met because they matter.
Yeah.
That's powerful.
I mean, it was very intentional, but it's funny how many homesteaders I run into. We talk to them, and I give them that example, and they're like, "Man, I really should do that." It's like, I mean, it's simple, but and I feel like you can do that kind of like, doesn't just have to be on a homestead, but even in a house. Like Lacey, she had all the dishes in the kitchen are at ground level, so we have like drawers in the kitchen. All the plates and bowls and everything are down low, so they can empty the dishwasher themselves.
Yep.
Like nothing's out of reach for them. So I mean,
Yeah.
you can do it in a lot of ways.
We didn't do that here, and I get a lot of times when I ask them to get something, uh, oh, well, I can't reach it. And my response to that has always been, that's funny, because the cookies that you always seem to find are on a shelf higher than
Right.
whatever it is. You seem to
Yep.
be able to get there.
Yeah.
So, like, the I can't doesn't work here.
Right.
Because for some reason the chairs are stacked in the dining room where you
Yeah.
managed to get to the suites, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but I do like that making it easier for them is and it's actually like a really compassionate act of kindness. Like,
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, the ulterior motive is they can participate in the dishwashing,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
But it also doesn't make it more difficult for them.
Right. Yeah.
That's cool, man. I dig it. I dig it. Where can people find you and the stuff that you're doing, and learn more?
Yeah. So we've got a podcast, The Schoolhouse Life. We've got a Facebook group, that's The Schoolhouse Life also. And then if you go to theschoolhouselife.com/podcast, we'll have like some resources on there, like self-sufficiency resources and that kind of thing, that you can kind of just get a little taste of, our life and what we're doing, and see if you fit in there, and, kind of make the most
Yeah,
of it.
that's cool. So what do you guys do for fun? Like,
And
one
we
of
used,
my biggest fears of, like,
yeah,
farming or ranching or having, is then there becomes the responsibility. And, like, if I want to
yeah,
bounce for 2 weeks to go play, there's
right.
all these living things that
Yeah.
depend on. It's like, how do you guys manage that? Like, what do you guys do for a good time?
So pre-pandemic, my favorite thing to do is travel, which, Lacey's favorite thing is to sit at home. So we balance that.
Oh, yeah. So you
But
and my wife, yeah, my wife and I were this. I'm like, let's hit the road, and she's like, I'm perfectly good right here.
yeah, she says, I designed the house and the property that makes me want to stay here. Like, why would I leave this? And I'm like, I want to discover the rest of the world. But to answer your question, like, you just hire a farm sitter. You ask, or you trade. If you can't afford that, you trade with other homesteaders in the area. Again, that whole community aspect of, you know, we'll just say, hey, you watch our homestead and we'll watch yours when you're ready to go somewhere. And, you know, there's always a,
I wouldn't
so
even have known that was a thing.
yeah. I mean,
That's
it's
cool.
like, you know, again, it's just setting up systems. So I have like a system of like, if we're going to be gone for like a month, I have like all the animals are going to have their little spots for a month, and our neighbor across the street just walks over and feeds them, and we're good. So yeah.
Yeah. So it goes back to the whole like taking I can't out of the vocabulary, right?
Right.
Like
Yeah.
if I have this, you can. You just got to develop a system to manage the
Yeah.
things, right? And it's like anything else in life. Yeah, there's anomalies, there's emergencies that pop up, there's weird things you can't account for,
Right.
but that's outside of your control, and so you just let it be.
Yeah. And I think like for us too, like our income is not dependent on the homestead. So, you know, if we're gone or if we're here, we're making the same amount of money. So that
Yeah.
there's that aspect, which I mean, I highly encourage. I know you do too. Like people to find an income that's not dependent on trading time for money.
Yeah.
You know?
No, time freedom is the biggest thing. Like we talk
Yeah.
about all the time. Like there's just no comparison.
Yeah.
I'd like to have financial freedom.
Yeah.
My experience has been that the people who have financial freedom uh, sacrifice more for that
Right.
than
Yeah.
I'm willing to. Like
Yeah.
I would much rather have the time freedom to take on projects that mean something, to be fulfilled, really.
Yeah.
Tony
Exactly.
Robbins talks a lot about the art of or the science of achievement, which is a real thing. Like I can tell you how to get from A to B,
Yeah.
but the fulfillment piece is an art.
Yeah.
And it sounds to me like you guys are living a really fulfilled life, and you've
Yeah.
created some things, and those decisions are hard. Like
They are. Yeah.
I feel like you guys have probably sacrificed some things to create that life and that space for your kids and yourselves. And there's probably fun things that you haven't done because
Yeah.
other things
I,
come first.
I think so. And in some ways, though, I mean, there's sometimes where I feel guilty just because of being in the homestead community. A lot of homesteaders we know haven't done everything our kids and our family have done. You know, I mean, we've lived in Israel for 2 months, you know, multiple times. We've gone a lot of different places. So I mean, it's um, yeah, I mean, there are some sacrifices, but again, I think if you kind of design and prioritize how you want your life to be and then work towards that, like you're saying, you know, like set those goals and make those things happen, and then, you know, be okay with where your life's at.
Yeah. Yeah. I dig it, man. I
Yeah.
love it. I appreciate you so much taking the time. I have learned a ton and I'm inspired. I hope other people are inspired to at least make some changes, some
Yeah.
little things. We're gonna I'm gonna have to figure out a way once we buy this house that we're looking at doing here in the next year. I'm gonna fly you out. You
Awesome.
guys, we'll cover your homestead sitter, and you can come out and we can work this this plot for a couple weeks, and you can help me lay out
That
what we
sounds
want
like
to
fun,
do.
man.
I think that would be a blast, man.
Oh, that would be. Yeah.
That would be cool. I appreciate you, man. Anything else you want to tell the world?
No, man, that's it. I appreciate your time. Thank you. And I would just say if you've been thinking about homesteading, you know, just get started. Do something small and, you know, take it from there.
So good. So good. Thanks, brother. Tell your wife and kids we said hello. Tell
We'll
them I
do
said
it.
thank you for letting me pull you away for a couple hours. I know you got somewhere you got to be.
Yeah. I appreciate it, man.
Yeah, it
Thank
was
you.
good. It was good. It was fun.